of us believe that besides the physical bodies that we have, that there's a soul that also makes up the body. Rest by. Okay. Thank you. Fellow Toastmasters and honored guests, I've always been intrigued by things that are beyond the physical, things that are just beyond what me and you see, the fact that you're wearing a blue shirt and I'm wearing a light blue shirt, and that I see you and that you see me. I've always been intrigued by the supernatural, things that we cannot explain, things that we cannot see. And what my parents are telling me, or have been telling me recently now that I'm a grown person, is that when I was a kid, I was always asking a lot of questions, and I was always asking questions that was a little bit advanced for my age at the time. One of the things that I've heard my mom say was that when I was 5 years old, of course, a little background to this is that I was brought up in a Christian home. My parents went to the Catholic church, and they also took me to Catholic church. And so we went to services on time, routinely. And so one of the questions I heard that I asked my parents was, well, if there's a God who created all these things and made all these wonderful things, who made God? And so I've heard that, my parents said, well, that's not a question you should be asking at your age, type of thing. But I think it just goes to tell that I've always had that intriguing and inquiring type of attitude towards things that we cannot tell, towards things that we cannot see. And maybe that kind of could explain maybe how I became an analyst, in the sense that I'm always trying to find out things, I'm always trying to make things make sense. But going back to the subject of why I asked the question about the soul, I know it may be a little bit controversial because in this day and age, there's a lot of, we have, atheists and people that don't believe in a supreme being, which obviously different kinds of religions call this supreme being different names, obviously. There's people that call it God, there's people that call it Allah, there's people that call it Buddha, all kinds of things depending on the religion. And to me, it's always been intriguing. I've always been really trying to figure this thing out. How can you prove it? How can you really tell? So recently, actually, I want to say probably right around June, July of this year, I started reading this book by Dan Brown. It's called The Lost Symbol. Very interesting book. It takes you back to a lot of things that has to do with the supernatural, obviously. And so reading this book, and by the way, the book is both a documentary and also a fiction as well. So some of the things that Dan Brown mentions in the book can be seen as fiction, but also why it's a documentary is that he actually had interviewed some people, because what he talks about in the book a lot has to do with secret societies and stuff, like the Freemasons and so on. So he actually had interviewed members of these organizations in compiling this book. He actually was given the permission to go to some of their lodges and their temples to visit and see how they conduct their meetings and things of that nature. So he brings all that knowledge and the experience from these interviews to write this book. And so one of the critical pieces of this book that I read has to do with, there's a scientist in this book, and this is one of the pieces that is actually a real piece of it. It's more of a documentary than a fiction. So this scientist, I don't have his name with me right this minute, was about to die. He was diagnosed with, I believe, cancer or something like that. And so he was about to die, and his contribution to science was that he offered to donate his body for research, whatever kind of research. That was what he decided to do when he's dead. So one of the scientists in this book, a female scientist, was working out of a lab, and her whole thing was to prove that indeed the human body also is made up of a soul, not just what we see, not just the fact that you can hear me talk and I can see you. And so what she did was, very close to when this other scientist was going to die, let's just say a couple of hours to this other scientist dying, she decided to create this enclosure of something that looks like a bed, but it's all enclosed. It looks more like one of those things that I think they put you through, I think in the sauna rooms, or when you're trying to get a tan or something. But anyway, so she decided to put this other body through that, through something like that. And then they had all kinds of sophisticated cameras focusing at this body that's in this enclosure. And so basically they started timing. They started, timing, and they also weighed his body, the weight of the body that was about to die. And so they recorded that weight. And then as soon as he gave up, as soon as this person died, they also weighed the body again immediately, just within a couple of milliseconds. And it was fascinating to find out that the weight of the body actually reduced. It actually reduced considerably from what it was before he died. Also, very interesting also was the fact that all the infrared cameras they had, all the equipment they had, spotted something escaping from his body, something that was more like, from the description, it was like a white cloud. It was like a little bit white cloud just going, it left. And so they go, oh, what was that that just left him? And this was the minute he gave up, is when this thing left him. So, and that's really pretty much the end of that experiment on this dead body. But for me, trying to, have some conclusion to everything, it made me realize, okay, so that right there, which they did touch on that a little bit, is possibly the soul that just left him, and now he's dead. Now he's just flesh, obviously. And in my own conclusion, in my own little way, I'm thinking, okay, so if this soul left this body, where is it going? Where is that soul going? What is that place called that this soul is now, heading to? Obviously, there's all kinds of names out there, heaven, hell, purgatory, all kinds of names depending on the field of study or the school of thought that you're reading on, obviously. But also, it also made me think, well, wherever this soul has escaped to, there's got to be somebody there in control of that place, whatever that place may be. And so it leads me again to conclude that there's got to be a supreme being somewhere that is in charge of things like the soul, things that we cannot see, things that we cannot comprehend, things that are just mystery. And my own belief and my own conclusion is that maybe that's why this supreme being is also a mystery, because he or she, whatever this thing is, chooses to be that way. And so, considering that we lost someone in the club, actually we lost a wife of one of our members just died in the club, and I thought about just, it struck me. So I felt like this topic would be a good one to pick for for today's meeting. So again, it leaves us with the question: is there a supreme being? So.